If you are one of those woodworkers or furniture makers that really does fret and stress about getting the exact color match of a lot of your work so it's integrated into an overall theme you have, I have one suggestion for you that will eliminate a lot of the stress in your life. You ready? Stick with painted pieces. The rest of y'all, let's talk about color palette. The thing is, wood will change color over its lifetime, and there really isn't anything you can do about it. And I know it wreaks havoc with people that do a lot of intarsia because they like really bright yellows and reds, so they use stuff like yellow heart and Paduke, or they want purples to come in, so they grab purple heart. And then, people hang them on their walls, and over time, the colors change, and it just looks differently. And I think that's one of the signs of a really good woodworking artist, because they don't really concern themselves with the color of the wood at the beginning of their project. They're concerned with what it's going to look like 5 years from now when it reaches its maturity, and it will stay consistent for the next 200 to 300 years. I mean, that's the kind of thinking you have to possess, understanding what's going to be happening with the wood over time. And here's an excellent example. Just a few days ago, I published a video about making this mallet right here. It's it's made out of boat art, and when you first cut it, it is neon yellow. And then in a few days, it kind of darkens up to this kind of mellower yellow, kind of more of a mustard. But in about 6 months, it's going to be this color. Can you see the color difference, the hue difference, and how much darker it is? And then in about 3 years, it's going to be this color. All three of these pieces of wood are the same tree I processed about 4 years ago, and I made these items over time. That is a huge color spread. And this is not uncommon. This might be a bit extreme, but I mean, really, it's not uncommon. Maple. Everyone considers maple as a very light color, right? Well, take a look at this. Here's my French square. You saw me make it in a video many years ago. It's made of cherry and a really curly piece of maple that I just only had a small piece of, so that's why I made it into this tool. But I would say I made it 4 years ago, maybe. You see the color of the maple. Now, in a French square, you're constantly retruing up this outside because this is your 90 degrees. So I'm always planing this back, and you've seen me do this in a couple videos. Look at the color difference. See how much lighter that shade is? I mean, that is quite a few steps in the lightness factor. And this is only after a few years. Maple will continue to darken, to turn golden over time. That's just its natural lifespan. Even more so, look at the cherry. Nice kind of reddish brown color. Well, let's look at a freshly milled piece of cherry. So I just picked up this board from my local lumber mill. It's cherry, and here's that French square. Can you see the hue difference? And this will continue to darken a little bit longer because I made this quite a bit before I made this. And it is from a different tree, so there just might be different chemicals on it. And it's in the same color family, but both of these are cherry. That's quite a bit redder. And I don't put any dyes or anything like that on it. Now, look at this cherry board. Let's plane it a little bit, see what we got. See how it's a little bit lighter right here? Even from this, and this is probably just a couple months over because the lumber mill I used skip planes all their boards. So I mean, it darkens fairly quickly to a slightly darker color, and then over time it continues to get that deeper and deeper color we associate with cherry, kind of that reddish brown. Here's another example. I got a piece of poplar right here. I'm going to plane off one side so we get a nice fresh color. And a lot of people hate poplar because of its look. I mean, it's green and it's got purple purples in it, and then browns, and all that kind of stuff. I mean, look at this thing. I get past the oxidation layer, the UV light layer, and you are talking about a green board. But I want you to know something. This workbench is made from the same board. These are just some of the scraps I had from way back when I made these workbenches. And I refinish these tops every few months. You've seen a video in one of my woodworking tips about that one where I just did this one. It darkens up pretty fast. These greens become dark browns. And you know, this compared to a piece of pine, I mean, they are not in the same color palette. I mean, color hue selection. I mean, that's kind of ugly together. But when you let them age over time, notice this workbench and my bench top, they're kind of coming together in a color spectrum. It just happens naturally. And speaking of pine, I mean, I just finished this little sawtill up in an earlier video. I made this probably 4 years ago. This is orange. This is yellow. They're the same species. It's both southern yellow pine. It just happens over time. Give you another example of why it happens. I have a little shop cabinet right here. Once again made out of southern yellow pine. The outside has gone to some of my art market shows because I've used this to display like pins and stuff behind glass and everything like that. So it sat in the sun quite a bit. The sun beat down, it darkened it up. Notice it's a darker hue of the orange than this one right here, which this piece has been mainly on the inside. But if I open it up, you can tell the color change from the part of that has been in the sun to the part that hasn't. It's dramatically different. Even right here, where this style was hitting on the top, you see that? It's a sunburn line. And that's what UV light is, what does a lot of the darkening aspect of color, of hue change. Another example, we got my tools right here. Even on the inside, UV light affects it. You can't escape it. I mean, these have been hanging in these spots for who knows how many years. They affect the wood. Now, UV light isn't the only thing that will affect the color of wood. There is some oxidation, some chemical change that happens with the reaction of the chemicals native in the wood and air, whatever we have out here. An example of that is Purple Heart. Now, when you first cut Purple Heart, I mean right off the saw, it is not that bright purple. But if you give it a few minutes, that freshly exposed grain will react with whatever's in the air, and it turns that bright purple. But then, over time, it continues to react with UV light, and Purple Heart becomes a dark brownish color. Not the bright color we associate with it. The only way to get the original color back is to sand off that top oxidized layer. The same seems to hold true with most exotic rainforest kinds of woods. They turn to this darker brown, red heart, yellow heart, purple heart, all those kind of darken with time. They will not stay that original color. Now, what can you do about this? Pretty much nothing. I mean, yeah, you can add UV filter protection, but it's going to change eventually. It might extend it out from maybe 3 years to 5 years, but it's something you got to deal with. And that, once again, kind of returning to an idea, is that's one of the defining characteristics of really good furniture makers. They plan for this ahead of time. And probably one of the best examples I've seen is a picture from Fine Woodworking magazine. Garrett Hack built a pear and maple table. And when I first saw the picture of this table, I couldn't believe what he did. I mean, it was kind of garish. There's lots of contrast in there, combined with the busyness of all this curly maple, and really, I didn't understand. But then you look at a picture of that same table much later in time, and the pear seems to have lightened in the sunlight. It's dark. It's been bleached out by the UV, where the maple has done the opposite. It's reversed. And they kind of come together, and it looks so awesome now because he planned for what the wood would do naturally. So if you're looking to make a bunch of furniture that kind of all goes together, My main suggestion would be to pick a few species and stick with them and let them age together. Because you might build a whole bedroom set out of cherry and it's a nice bright light pink when you first cut it up. Then your significant other gets mad because they wanted that deep red cherry color. So you dye it, you stain it. What happens when the underlying wood continues to darken and then you have that dark stain and it becomes almost black in 5 years? What are you going to do? Rebuild the whole set? Instead, just let it age naturally. I really do believe that dyes and stains just don't belong in a lot of our woodworking unless you're doing a lot of restoration where you're having to match woods that aren't available anymore, like true mahogany, and you have the current mahogany and you kind of have to blend them together. Or if you're really into faux furniture where you're taking pine and making it look like cherry or something like that. Which, in my mind, why not just buy cherry? Because by the time you invest money in your stains, dyes, all that extra labor, the money you saved in buying the less expensive wood just doesn't seem worth it to me. But that's what a lot of people like to do. So my tip for the day, plan for the future when you're selecting your color palette. And with patience, your work is just going to look awesome. To tie in with today's theme of talking about wood, I got a great little book for you, or a little series of books. But before we get there, if you like this video, please do me a favor. Like, favorite, subscribe, do all those social medias. Visit my website where I run a blog and I also have an online store where I sell not only my own woodworking, some swag like t-shirts and hats, but I also make shop-made tools and other stuff that is available occasionally. All those items really do help me subsidize making these videos for you. Now, I like going out and getting my own lumber. Mainly it's because it's cheap, but I do a lot of wood turning, so getting fresh lumber is kind of important. But I'm a tree mortician. I can identify the species as long as it's dead and on my workbench. But looking up at the bark and the branches, all that kind of stuff, I have no clue. The only way I can tell a pecan tree is because I see pecans on it. Same with oaks and apples and pears and stuff like that. Bodark trees, they have those little horse apples. You can cut into them a little bit and I see the color of the wood and I can get a little bit closer, but really until it gets on my workbench, I'm pretty much clueless. And I imagine every state has somebody that's taken the time to do a book like this one, but in Texas we have a really nice book written by Paul Cox and Patty Leslie, and it's got some wonderful illustrations. And it'll show you the different leaves and stuff like that you're looking for, what berries come off of it, what the bark looks like, what climate and area they typically grow in. So if I'm looking for a specifically black walnut just versus normal walnut, I can look in this book, identify the differences in the leaves and the bark, and go find me a tree. And I like to stick with the walnuts, the escarpment cherries. I mean, a subspecies of black cherry that grows only in Texas. Really, really hard, really cool grain. Well, I learned about it in this book. So if you're like me and you really like studying up on the woods and you don't know that much about the study of trees, I don't even know the term, but go look in your local bookstore, do some research. I'm sure somebody has written a book about the trees that grow in your neighborhoods.